You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode number 85. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my beautiful friend. Welcome back to the podcast. Happy New Year. If you are listening to this podcast episode when it goes live, it is the first episode to go live in 2023. I hope you had a fabulous holiday. I hope that you celebrated the new year, and I am so excited for you and for everything that this new year has in store for you. If you have been listening to this podcast for the last couple of weeks, I've had a bit of a theme going on, a theme of the new year, of how to create sustainable success. I've talked about having a courageous 2023. And if you are looking ahead at the goals that you want to achieve, you're looking at changes that you want to make in your practice, transformations in your personal life, then I've got you, my friend. You are so in the right place. Whatever it is that you set your heart on, whatever it is that you choose to go after, you are going to need to make some decisions. And the reason that I'm recording today's podcast episode about making difficult decisions is because what I want to offer you today are some tools that will help guide you as you navigate decisions going ahead, not just in the new year, but beyond. And what I find with decisions is that lawyers will often reach out to me with a difficult decision that they need to make. And so the purpose of today's exercise is to find strategies that will help you when it comes to those decisions that you find particularly difficult. Now, problems, decisions that come up in a legal practice are sometimes, I would say, able to fit into one of three categories. The first category that I see among lawyers is struggles to make decisions within your professional work. Now, I'm not here to give you legal advice or tell you how to do your job. But what I have noticed and what I experienced when I was practicing law is that decisions can be really challenging to make. People don't go to lawyers with easy problems to solve. Typically, if someone has retained you to help, whether it's with a transaction, whether it's they are pursuing somebody in court, whether it's a family dispute, whether it's an estate case that they're seeking your advice on, the decisions that you are making, the way that you are assisting is rarely a clear-cut black and white answer. You are, I'm guessing, operating a lot of the time in shades of gray. It may be that you don't have full information. You have the information that your client has provided to you, but you don't know what other information exists out there. It may be that the stakes are really high. You are dealing with people's very personal and very important matters. Sometimes the stakes are high because of the number of dollars that are involved in a particular mandate. Sometimes it's the nature of the work. You're dealing with custody of somebody's child, the house they are going to live in, the day-to-day of what that is going to look like for a particular family. These are not light matters, and you are in a position of responsibility. You've got a fiduciary obligation to your client. And so the decisions that you're making are not, do I have chicken or fish for lunch? These are decisions that are really potentially impactful for others. You may also be in a situation where maybe the facts are murky and so is the law. Maybe you're dealing in an area of law where every case that comes your way presents a new novel issue in law. You may be in areas that just simply haven't been explored before. There isn't case law or a statute to guide you in terms of what the outcome is most likely to be. You may find yourself going back to first principles in order to be able to give a reasoned answer. And in all of these cases, whether it's lack of information, whether it's lack of clarity on the law, or whether it's simply the sheer stakes that are involved in the decisions that you are making, these situations can bring out in you thoughts and feelings that make it difficult to make these decisions. You might feel uncertain about what the outcome is going to be. You may start to doubt your ability to make a decision. You may feel overly responsible for what may come of decisions that are ultimately made. And as a result, you may find that you start pushing things off. Maybe you push that decision over to somebody else, maybe somebody more senior, maybe another lawyer in your firm. Maybe you seek buy-in from others, and there's certainly a healthy amount of camaraderie that goes on within a law firm when it comes to dealing with difficult legal situations. There may be differing views, and it may be helpful to have different perspectives, but you may be outsourcing the decision-making to somebody else, or you may find that you are just avoiding making decisions altogether. You may find you're procrastinating and pushing things off. The second category that I would offer here are decisions that you're making about your career. So what you might find is that you struggle when it comes to making choices that impact your career. So for example, you may want to try a new role, whether it's within your existing firm or organization or outside of it, but there's no certainty that you'll try out that role and that you'll like it. You may want to advance and take on more responsibility, again, maybe within your firm or organization or somewhere else, but then you question whether you have what it takes to really master that role, to be efficient, to be successful in that role. You may find that you have the promotion and then you freeze up. You may find that you're overcome with imposter syndrome, and it's really difficult for you to assume your authority and to make decisions. It may also be that you're kind of going through the motions. You're not really happy. You're struggling where you are, but you don't want to make a decision. You don't want to move because you feel nervous, fearful that you're not going to find something better, that in fact you may end up somewhere worse. You may feel like you need permission from somebody, whether it's implicitly your parents or your partner or somebody who plays an important role in your life. You may feel like you need that before you move on. And so it could be that you, again, freeze up, you stay stuck, you don't make a decision, and you can feel increasingly trapped within the circumstances of your own career. Finally, a third category of decision where you might find yourself feeling really challenged, like these are really tough decisions, difficult decisions that you do not want to make, can happen in your personal life, whether it's a relationship. Sometimes it's a difficult relationship with a family member or a partner. Maybe it's one of your children. Maybe it's a parent. It may be difficult choices about where you want to live. Maybe you're in an environment that you're not particularly happy with, but the pros and cons, the uncertainty about moving somewhere else, the logistics of all of that are daunting. It may be that there are health choices that you need to make. You may have varying degrees of choices that you need to make, whether it's something that is fairly surface level that you simply have a difficult time adhering to, or maybe it's something a little bit more profound where you've got a more serious health concern and you have to make really critical decisions. These are all areas where you may find that you have decisions and you may be worried about the fallout from those decisions. You may be unwilling, again, to deal with the uncertainty of those decisions, or sometimes you may even feel a futility in making a decision. Maybe it's having a conversation. Maybe it's taking a particular action because you don't believe that your decision or your action will actually make the situation any better, that you won't be able to have any impact. And in these scenarios, what you might find is that without the certainty, you freeze up and you don't move forward. Or sometimes you end up creating more of the very thing that you are trying to avoid. So these are three areas, whether it's in your professional work, whether it's in relation to your career and your career planning, or in your personal life, where you may struggle with a particular decision. And if any of these resonate with you, I assure you, you are completely normal. It is very common, especially among lawyers. Law tends to attract individuals who are really high performers, high achievers with really high standards. You may find that you have perfectionistic tendencies, and big shout out and lots of love to all my fellow perfectionists. I can certainly relate to this, where you want your decision to be the correct decision. And so it's almost like you're waiting for everything to fall into place before you make that decision. You may find that you are risk averse. Maybe you were attracted to law because of the rules-based nature of it. And so when you're looking for a rules-based fashion in which to make a decision, if that framework isn't readily available, it may feel really uncomfortable to make a decision that is so uncertain. It may also be that you are in a culture, or feeling very much in a culture, that reinforces the need for your decisions to be the right decision. And you may be in a culture that supports the idea that there are difficult decisions, that there are tough decisions, and that those decisions require extra planning and certainty. And this maybe is more easily explained by contrasting decisions in the legal landscape, for example, relative to other industries. As a coach, I am in a much different arena. I am working with individuals who, in the coaching realm, are very much embracing a culture of risk, a culture of decisions where the fallout really isn't as much of a concern as it can be in a legal environment. If you look at entrepreneurs, for example, there is very much a fail forward mentality where the approach is let's risk, let's fail. Every time we do that, we learn and we move on. And the same is, I think, true within a legal environment, that part of your learning is going to mean that things aren't always going to go as planned. You're not always going to meet expectations, which by definition maybe failure. Failure is really defined as unmet expectations. Whether or not you choose the word failure or learning opportunity really depends on the lens through which you're characterizing the actions and the outcomes. But suffice it to say that the legal culture generally is quite conservative. And of course, when you have matters in your hands that are high stakes, where the nature of the issues involved, the consequences, the impact that it has on your clients, obviously you're trying to get things right the first time. But the intolerance for failure, and I use the word failure in quotation marks as a placeholder for what else that might signify, that intolerance breeds more anxiety around decision making than it might if you were in a culture where growth and innovation were prioritized over being correct. So all this lends itself to an environment where it can become and feel increasingly difficult to make decisions. Another element of that too, particularly in a legal environment, is that you may have mentors or lawyers in your circles who are open about some of the challenges that they have faced when it comes to learning and growth and mistakes that they've made. But you may also be in an environment where there's a very low risk or mistake or decision error tolerance, and nobody really talks about it. So if something like that happens to you, you may feel very much alone and like there's something wrong with you for a mistake or a decision having gone in a direction that was not anticipated. And so that can make it feel even more daunting when it comes to making decisions. And so what you may try to do as a result is what we discussed before. It's putting off decisions. It's asking other people to decide for us. It's finding ways to step away from that authority and maybe move it to somebody else. But ultimately, this doesn't work as a long-term strategy. Number one, if you're not making any decisions or you're making fewer decisions, you're not practicing that skill of decision-making. And what that results in is that you reinforce your belief that you're not good at making decisions. And when decisions come your way, they seem increasingly difficult to make. And an analogy that comes to mind as I'm sharing this with you is this idea of learning how to ski. So if you are the kind of person that got on skis at 2 years old and you've been going up and down the mountains since then, chances are you're an excellent skier and you made your mistakes at a very early stage. If you are like me, say, and you're in your mid-40s and you want to learn to ski, you're going to feel like you should be at the same level as a skier as those who started out when they were 2 years old. And you're going to be making mistakes that the 2-year-olds were making when they were 2 years old. And that can increase that feeling of, it shouldn't be like this. That thought might be going through your mind. I shouldn't be so far behind. I shouldn't struggle so much in making these decisions. I shouldn't struggle so much as a skier, when really the reason that you're struggling is just because you started later. So the longer you put off making decisions, the more difficult it is to then make them, because it's like you're the adult on skis who's falling over instead of the 2-year-old on the skis who's falling over. So the more you push it off, the more difficult it becomes to step into that role as decision maker. And what can be created there then is a sense of disempowerment, where you label yourself as somebody who's not very good at making decisions. You may find that you reach a point of stagnancy within your career, within your decisions about your career, or within the way that you act in your career, the level of responsibility that you're willing to take on. It may also be that you find that you're at an impasse in your relationships or elements of your personal life where you're simply not comfortable to make a decision and move forward. So what I would love to talk about today, and what I'd love to offer you, are some strategies that you can consider when it comes to making decisions that are difficult decisions for you. And there are 3 altogether. The first strategy that I would love to offer you is a strategy that really centers on awareness. And to raise your awareness about difficult decisions, first of all, I would invite you to consider what it is about a decision that makes it feel like a difficult decision for you. What I invite you to consider here is a possibility. What if there was no such thing as a difficult decision, or a tough decision, or a decision that is hard to make? And what you might think about is how decisions themselves often aren't something that require a huge investment of time. You can make a decision and move forward. The reason the decision feels difficult, or we think of it as difficult, is because of how we're thinking about that decision, the potential consequences that follow from that decision. So what is it about a particular decision that feels hard for you? Some examples of what that might be: it might be uncertainty. It might be that when you face a decision where there are shades of gray and you don't know the specific outcome, that the uncertainty is what is troubling for you. And so you might ask yourself what it is about that uncertainty that is difficult. Is it the fact that you are concerned that you're going to have people judge you, that you are going to judge yourself? Is there going to be some sort of a fallout that you don't feel like you're equipped to handle? It may be a skills decision. It might be that the decision requires a level of skill that you don't yet have, in which case that might be more of a training question. Do I need to develop my skills further in order to be able to make this type of judgment call? It might be a lack of certainty around information, for example. And does that mean that you need more information about that decision, or do you need to qualify or limit the scope of your decision? It may be that there's perfectionism that is holding you back. You may feel like you're unable to make a decision because you want it to be perfect. And as a result of that perfectionism, you're not making any decision at all. And it may be that you want to consider what a pragmatic decision might look like. How can you move that decision forward in a way that is compatible with your desire for excellence and yet has the effect of moving forward instead of staying stuck? It may be that you're paralyzed by a sense of over responsibility. This, I think, would be identifying so much with your client's situation that you really do take that on as your own. And there is a delineation between your responsibility and the ultimate outcome of a particular mandate that you're working on. And I think sometimes it may feel like that responsibility extends broader than it does. And so are you setting the responsibility boundary at an appropriate place, or are you taking on more than is truly yours? And it may also be that you're holding back from a decision for some very personal limiting beliefs about yourself. For example, you may feel a lack of confidence around the decision. You may have a lack of belief that you're going to be able to move forward. You may have a fear of others or of yourself judging you. And so the purpose of this exercise is to take a look at the decision that you find difficult, because there are decisions that you don't find difficult at all that others might find difficult. And for them, they will look at that decision differently than you will. And for you, there are decisions that you will find difficult that others would not necessarily struggle with. So the exercise here is to look at what it is about that decision that is hard for you, and then to solve for that problem. And another tool you might use here is to think about examples of where somebody around you may have been struggling with a decision, and they may have been struggling with that decision for years. And for you, it may have seemed so clear what that person really ought to have done or should do, right? It might be very simple. It might be like that with your clients. They may come to you for legal advice, and it may be so clear which of their options is the most viable, is the best option, and yet they might not be able to see it. And I believe there's an old proverb, the person who hires themselves as a lawyer has a fool for a client, something along those lines, which I've always understood to be targeted at the lack of objectivity we have in relation to our own problems, because we're so wrapped up emotionally in the consequences that flow from decisions made in relation to that problem. And so you may see it in others. You may see more objectively the decision that they're making, and it may seem so much more simple to you than it does to them. And the same is true for the decisions that you are making. If you were an outsider looking in, really objectively, what is hard about that decision? It may be that the difficulty lies within, and that it's something that you may be able to solve for internally. So that's the first strategy when it comes to making decisions, is that awareness piece. The second strategy that I would invite you to consider is to use a framework for making a particular decision. And what I'd invite you to do here is to zoom out. A decision is rarely made in a vacuum. Decisions are typically in an ecosystem of some other situation. So, for example, if you're at work and you're making a decision that relates to a file, then the decision isn't just a one-off. It is one single decision that might be made in the context of maybe it's a litigation file or a closing or a relationship that you have with a client. What I invite you to do there is to zoom out and think about where this decision lies in relation to the whole and what is the objective. And so a few ways of looking at a framework, because ultimately what I'm offering for this second strategy in zooming out is to give yourself a framework for the decision, one that takes into account where that decision is situated. And I'm going to offer 3 different ways you can look at it. Number 1 is to put the decision in the context of a goal. So if it's a file, maybe it's a goal for the file. If it's you in your career, if your ultimate goal for your career is to become a judge, for example, that might become a framework through which you can filter the decisions that you're making about your career at this point in time. If you're looking at another framework, that you might look at is values. So let's say you're making a decision in your personal life, a decision in your professional career that is based on what to do next. And maybe there's not a specific goal that you can think of that you can point to, but you know the values that you want to adhere to along the way, then that might serve as a framework for how you make the decision. If you're, for example, having a difficult relationship with a colleague, you may have conflicting values. On the one hand, you might be striving for peace. And on the other hand, you might be striving for honesty. It may be that if you follow the value of honesty, what that leads to is a very frank conversation with that colleague. That might lead to one outcome. If, on the contrary, or if your dominant value is peace, that might lead to a very different looking conversation with that same colleague. So what I invite you to do here is when you're looking at the decision, I'd invite you to think about the values that you have and to use your values as a framework to guide the decision that you're making. A third point of reference that you might use if you're trying to make a decision and you're trying to contextualize it is to imagine making that decision from yourself at a point in time in the future. This probably resonates most with career decisions or personal decisions where you look to a point in the future where you want to be, and what decision would you make from that point in time? So if it means being a sole practitioner, for example, maybe right now you're working within the context of a law firm and ultimately you want to be out on your own. What are some of the steps that you need to take now in order to get to that place 5 years from now? What influence will that have on some of the decisions that you make today in order to set yourself up for the future? So that is a second framework that you might use when you're faced with a difficult decision, is what kind of a framework applies. If you zoom out and use a lens, whether it's a goal, whether it's values, whether it's looking at the question from the perspective of where you want to be in the future, these are all ways of contextualizing that decision so that it becomes easier for you to make. The third strategy that I offer here is to look at why you're making a particular decision. So chances are, if you're making a decision, you're looking at it and you're weighing the pros and cons, you're looking at the different factors involved. This, I think, is a strategy that is very common. For some reason, the example that comes to mind, which is completely unrelated, is a Friends episode way back when I think Ross made some sort of a list about Rachel and what were her pros and cons, and I think that led to all sorts of trouble. And that might be the way that you're making a decision for something that you're doing at work. So maybe it's a direction on a file, whether it's a direction in your career, whether it's a decision you're making in a personal relationship or a health decision, whatever decision you're looking at. And you're looking at the pros and cons, the facts. And what I invite you to do here is to look at the decisions that are available to you and imagine that you pick that decision. Let's say there's 2 or 3 possible decisions that you could make. And if you look at the rationale that underlies you making each of these decisions, you might be surprised about what that reveals about your choice for that decision. So let's say, for example, you have a difficult relationship with a family member, and this has been going on for some time, and you struggle over whether to do something about it. And you look at your reasons for not saying anything. And maybe your reasons for not saying anything are that you are afraid of how that person is going to react. You do not want to rock the boat. You do not want to be misunderstood. Maybe you've had similar conversations in the past and it's never gone well. So these might be some of the reasons why you're choosing not to say anything at all. And then you might look at the alternative, which is to say something. It's to maybe advocate for yourself or express something that you need to express. It's the truth for you. And your reasons for doing it that way are because you want to feel like you are acting in integrity, that your relationship with that person is in alignment with how you really feel about your relationship with that person, that you feel like it is more true, that you feel like it is the right thing in a sense, or it's what's going to help you find peace on the other side of that conversation. So if you look at the 2 different reasons, you may find one set of reasons is more compelling than the others. And this doesn't necessarily lead you to making a decision that walks you through a path of comfort. Unfortunately, sometimes it means that you lead the path that is less comfortable. And if you listen to my podcast episode from last week, I talk about courage as a theme for 2023. And courage and taking courageous action doesn't always feel good. In fact, sometimes, and probably more often than sometimes, it's going to feel really uncomfortable. And yet, the reason that you may feel compelled to take the more courageous route is because of that integrity, because of that alignment, because it means that you get to be true to yourself and true to the things that are really of most value for you. So for this part of the exercise, if you're looking at strategy number 3, It's to be honest with yourself about why it is that you are choosing a certain path. Again, if we go back to some of those career choice examples, your choices might be stay where you are, where you're not really happy, but you're reasonably comfortable. And so your reason for staying on that route might just be it feels safe, it feels secure, you know what to expect. There's some level of certainty versus leaving, which invokes risk and uncertainty and a possibility for failure. And so you just want to ask yourself which set of reasons is the reasons, or is the set of reasons that aligns most with what you want. And again, these questions may result in you learning something about your reasons that you don't particularly like. And it doesn't mean that you have to act on these reasons necessarily. But going back to point one, it does raise your level of awareness around the decisions that you're making. So these 3 strategies that I'm offering, number 1, which is that awareness and identifying what it is about a decision that makes it feel difficult to you, asking yourself those questions, that's going to help you understand what it is about a decision that does feel difficult. Is it a lack of information? Is it uncertainty? Is it something that goes deeper within? That second strategy is to use a framework, whether it's looking at the decision in the context of a goal, in the context of your values, in the context of making that decision from some point in the future. You're zooming out and giving life to that decision. It's no longer in a vacuum, and it makes it easier for you to see which or what decision will help you push forward. And then finally, that third strategy, looking at the reason behind the different decisions that you might make, again, raises your level of awareness so that you understand better what it is that is motivating you in the decision that you are making. So when you are able to use these strategies, it will help you see what is happening when you make a decision. These are very meta decision-making skills. These are strategies to make decisions. And as you focus on what is happening around the decisions, you are going to learn about your own decision-making strategies, about what it is that informs your own decisions. And you're going to be able to choose more consciously how you go about making decisions. And as you make more decisions, as you practice making more decisions, you will find that you make progress. Practice makes progress. I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that practice makes perfect. If you're truly aiming for perfect, that might be possible if you're baking a cake and you're trying to get that recipe just right. And even then, I would say, having baked a little bit over the holidays, that's not always the case. But this idea that progress is certainly one of the outcomes that you will have when you practice making decisions. You will increase your comfort levels as you make more decisions because you'll realize that even when decisions don't necessarily lead to the outcome that you want, when you don't have certainty and you need to make a decision and maybe the consequences that follow from that aren't exactly what you would have wanted, you will find that you are still able to make another decision, that you are still able to pick up and move forward, and that forward momentum is most of the time, I would offer, better than staying stuck, not making any decisions at all. You'll also create more evidence for you making decisions. You'll have more experience. And you may even find that you start to welcome decisions. As your skills get better, you might see it as an opportunity for you to hone your decision-making skills. In order for you to implement these strategies, the skills that you'll need to develop are a willingness to step back and do the meta-analysis of the decision and what they mean about you and the way that you look at decisions. It also requires a willingness to take responsibility and ultimately to be powerful. Making decisions is exercising power. It means you are taking a stand. It means you are willing to be right, and you are also willing to be wrong. These strategies require that you develop an ability to explain and understand why you're making a decision. The example that comes to mind here is when I don't know if you still do math problems. For me, it was back in school and in university where on a math test, you would need to show your work. There's the proof. Here's the rationale behind how I reached a particular number. And so for you, you may want to have a record for yourself of how you reached a particular decision in case you ever second guess yourself after the decision is made and maybe you don't get the result that you want. You always want to give yourself the benefit of the doubt that the decision that you made was the best decision that you could have made at the time, that was a decision that made the most sense based on what you knew, and also the decision that was most in alignment with your goals, with your values, with where you wanted to move going forward. It will require that you have a willingness to exercise your judgment and discretion. That means having confidence and faith in yourself in the exercise of your judgment and in the exercise of your discretion. And going back to that earlier point, understanding and giving yourself that benefit of the doubt that the decision that you made was a good decision in the moment. And then you need to let it go, because you can control things up until a certain point, and then you need to let it go and see what happens. And sometimes it may not go in the direction that you wish it would go in, but sometimes it will also turn out better than you could have expected. And finally, you'll be required to develop that internal sense of confidence that you can deal with the consequences that flow from the decisions that you make. What will happen as a result is you will increase your levels of confidence around decision making, and you will feel more powerful when making decisions. You will go from being somebody who may identify themselves as indecisive or having a hard time making decisions to a decision maker. And finally, you may find that as you get better at making decisions, there are fewer difficult decisions. There are fewer tough decisions because those decisions no longer feel difficult or tough to you. So, my friend, I have thoroughly enjoyed connecting with you this week. As I mentioned, I hope that your 2023 is off to a beautiful start. And I very much hope that this episode has helped you find frameworks that are useful to you when it comes to making decisions as you jump into 2023 and go after what it is that you want to create for yourself, for your practice, for your family this year. So with that, my friend, I very much look forward to connecting with you next week. And thank you again. It has been such a pleasure. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.